Think about some of your favorite games in recent years. You know, do you love a game with a massive open world, online battles, first-person shooters, the epic stories? Whatever it is, it owes a huge debt to a handful of incredibly simple games from the 1970s and the early 80s. Now, this isn't a list of the best or most popular Atari games. This is about the 5 games that were so revolutionary they basically wrote the rule book for everything that came after. These are the 5 Atari games that truly changed video games forever. Before season passes, before cinematic cutscenes, before you could build an entire empire, there was the Atari 2600. It was just a humble little box with a fake wood panel, but it was also a Trojan horse that smuggled a revolution into living rooms all over the world. The games on this list, they aren't necessarily the most impressive or even the most fun to play today, but that's not really the point. The point is, each of these 5 titles introduced a totally radical new idea. They didn't just entertain, they created the very language of video games. They invented entire genres, figured out new ways for you to play with your friends, and even created business models that would shape the industry for decades. They built the bedrock that everyone from Nintendo to Naughty Dog would later build on. If you want to understand gaming today, you have to understand where it all started. Let's kick things off with the game that for many of us, millions of us, was our very first video game we played at home. You didn't really choose combat, it chose you. It came packed in the box with the Atari 2600 from 1977 until sometime around 1982, making it the default introduction to gaming at home, and man, what an introduction it was. Before combat, gaming was mostly about playing by yourself or hitting a ball back and forth in a Pong or a Pong variant. The idea of going head to head with a friend in your own home was brand new. Combat took the core idea of arcade games like Tank and supercharged it with 27 different game modes on a single cartridge. I mean, that was pretty cool for back then. 2 players, 2 joysticks, and 1 screen that became a digital battlefield. Whether you were in a tank, a biplane, or a jet, the goal was beautifully simple: outmaneuver and outgun your opponent. You know, my older brother, he was older, so typically he wouldn't always win, but we would play games like board games and stuff like that. It seems like he would usually win, or play chess. And in the rare times where it seemed like I was gonna win, he would try to cheat. It used to make me so mad. But I'll never forget, in combat when we would play, for some reason, he would always take the remember the game where it had the 1 orange bomber and the 3 little planes, and it was so unfair. The bomber never had a chance. He would always pick that bomber, like, this is the time I'm going to beat you with it. And I was always just whip his ass. It was so funny. It was like revenge for those times he would try to short count when we were playing Monopoly, roll a 10 and try to, count out 11 spots to avoid landing on my hotel. I'm sure you have things like that with your siblings. But this was the birth of the home multiplayer shooter. Every split-screen deathmatch, every co-op campaign, every Call of Duty lobby has a little piece of combat's DNA in it. It's the game that turned the living room into a place for friendly and sometimes not so friendly competition. It sparked rivalries between siblings and friends that lasted sometimes way after the TV was turned off. Some modes like Tank Pong with its bouncing missiles, or the absolutely chaotic Invisible Tank, had a surprising amount of strategy. It was primitive, sure, but it was totally pure. Combat taught an entire generation the simple joy of playing against another person, not just against a machine. If combat introduced people to the Atari console, then Space Invaders is the game that sold it. Before 1980, having a arcade experience at home was pretty much just a fantasy. Arcades and home consoles were 2 totally separate worlds. Space Invaders blew that wall to bits. See, before this port, home consoles were still seen as just fun toys, a cool novelty. That's partially why the Atari didn't sell so great at first. I mean, people couldn't justify the expense for what they were going to get to play. And the arcades were king. The arcade release of Space Invaders was a legitimate global phenomenon. So Atari made a brilliant move. They officially licensed the arcade smash hit, the 2600. While there had been a few minor arcade-to-home ports before, this was the first time a monster hit was licensed this way, and it set the standard for the entire industry. This was the birth of the killer app. Space Invaders became the reason to own an Atari 2600. When it was released, sales of the console quadrupled, turning it from a modest success into an absolute beast. You didn't have to feed quarters into a machine at the pizza place anymore. You could fend off that descending alien horde from your couch. And even though the graphics weren't a perfect match, the gameplay was just as addictive, and even added some new game modes that the arcade didn't have. Invisible aliens, invisible invaders, I should say, moving shields, and there were lots of others. The legacy of Space Invaders is immense. It proved that the home console market wasn't just a niche, it was a potential gold mine. It cemented the strategy of using arcade popularity to sell consoles, a trick Nintendo would later master with games like Donkey Kong. More than any other single game, Space Invaders made video games a permanent fixture in the American home. Hey, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane and getting flashbacks of fighting over the joystick, do me a quick favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out and lets me know that you want to see more deep dives just like this one. Now, while Space Invaders was all about bringing the arcade experience home, our next game was about creating something completely new. Before 1980, console games were almost always stuck on a single static screen. You shot stuff, you scored points, the game ended. There was no world to explore. Adventure blew the doors off of that concept. Games before Adventure were basically just reflex tests. They didn't have a sense of place. But the game's designer, Warren Robinette, wanted to capture the feeling of a huge text-based computer game called Colossal Cave Adventure and translate it into a graphical experience on the very limited Atari 2600. He basically had to make up the rules as he went. The result, a game where you, a simple square, were on a quest to find a chalice in a kingdom filled with castles, mazes, and 3 genuinely scary dragons. This was the birth of the action-adventure genre on consoles. For the first time ever, a game had multiple screens that were all connected to form a larger world. The instruction manual literally had to explain that you could move off the edge of the screen and a new area would appear. It introduced ideas we totally take for granted now, using keys to unlock doors, carrying an inventory even though it was just one item at a time, and fighting enemies that were still moving around even when you were off screen. That was cool. I tell you, I remember the first time I ever played Adventure. It was actually at the Kmart. My mom, I was with my friend Jim, he rode up there with us, and my mom was shopping, so we went to the electronics to just check things out, and they had the Atari set up and Adventure was plugged in, and we started playing it, and we were like, holy smokes. And he got it before I did, so I played it at his house for the next few weeks. But Adventure's legacy has another equally important part. Robinette was annoyed that Atari refused to give programmers credit for their work. So he hid a secret room in the game. If you found it, the text created by Warren Robinette appeared. It wasn't the very first hidden message in a game, but it was the one that caught everyone's attention. It was nicknamed the first Easter egg, and the term became a permanent part of gaming culture. Every secret level in Doom, every hidden reference in Grand Theft Auto, they all trace back to this one defiant act. Adventure didn't just give us a world to explore, it gave developers a way to leave their mark in it. By 1982, the Atari 2600 was in its prime, and a new company called Activision was pushing the hardware to its absolute breaking point. While Adventure gave us a world to explore one screen at a time, David Crane's masterpiece Pitfall created a world that felt like it was scrolling continuously, giving players an incredible sense of forward momentum. Before Pitfall, platforming in games like Donkey Kong usually happened on a single screen. The idea of a character running through a long connected environment just wasn't really a thing on home consoles. David Crane's first goal was just to create a realistic running animation. He nailed it so well that he built an entire game around it. The result was Pitfall Harry, a little hero running through a deadly jungle, leaping over pits, swinging on vines, and dodging scorpions and crocodiles. Those scorpions, man, I played the game again a few months ago, and I actually finished it, got all 32 treasures for the first time in my life. And the scorpions, I don't remember them being that hard to jump over when I was a kid, but you barely have enough room to clear them. It's a lot harder than what I remembered. I died a lot just trying to jump those stupid things. Pitfall was the creation of the side-scrolling platform. Now, technically, it wasn't one continuously scrolling world. It was actually 255 separate screens stitched together, but it created a seamless illusion of a long journey. This was a technical marvel for the time. Pitfall blended running, jumping, and collecting treasure against a 20-minute timer, a formula that became the blueprint for an entire genre. It sold over 4 million copies, making it the second best-selling game on the system. You can't overstate its legacy. Pitfall is the direct ancestor of Super Mario Bros., Sonic the Hedgehog, and every other side-scroller that came after. It proved that home consoles could deliver sprawling adventures that felt like a real journey, not just a single-room challenge. It also gave us one of gaming's first true mascots, born on a home console, Pitfall Harry, who was so popular, he even got his own cartoon. And here we are. Our number one spot is the most controversial, the most iconic, and maybe the most impactful game in Atari's history for reasons both good and very, very bad. PacMan wasn't just a game, it was a cultural tidal wave. The world was ready for a video game superstar. Gaming was popular, but it didn't have a face that everyone knew. The arcade version of PacMan changed all that, becoming an obsession that appealed to way more people than just young guys. It's true. I remember when we were at the beach when I was, probably 10 years old or something like that, and we would get the same condo every summer. My dad had a friend that owned one, and I don't know if he got it for free or for a good deal, but we would always go there and stay for like a week. And anyway, there was this huge Holiday Inn down several miles down the road that had like an inside swimming pool, a glass elevator, and a nice restaurant. It even had a movie theater in there. I remember we watched Raiders of the Lost Ark in that thing. But it had an arcade. It was a decent sized arcade too. And I remember PacMan was just, everybody was freaking out. Even my mom, and her friends were going on about how cute it was and everything. And my mom didn't care anything about video games, but everybody was just loving how cute PacMan was. Atari paid a fortune for the exclusive home console rights, betting it would be their biggest hit ever. They were so confident, and I will never understand this as long as I live, they made 12 million cartridges, more than the estimated 10 million Atari 2600s that even existed at the time. And I think we know why Combat stopped being the pack-in game for the Atari 2600 in 1982. The revolution here was complicated. On one hand, PacMan absolutely cemented the idea of a video game mascot and the power of a brand. It sold over 8 million copies, making it the best-selling Atari 2600 game of all time. It pushed gaming into the mainstream like nothing before it. But on the other hand, the revolution was a cautionary tale. The port itself was terrible. It was rushed to the market and made by just one programmer, Todd Fry. The game barely looked like its arcade parent, with flickering ghosts and weird blocky graphics. I remember the first time I saw PacMan, my dad was a State Farm agent for decades. Anyway, of course, he became good friends with some of the other agents. They would play golf together and fish together. Anyway, me and my mom went over to one of his friends over their house, and I don't know why we were there, but when we got there, his daughter Samantha and one of her friends, they were playing PacMan on the Atari, and she had just gotten it. And I remember I was just sitting there watching. I didn't say anything, I don't want to be rude, but I swear I was thinking, this is it? Is this really the best they could do? I mean, you already had Atari had already shown they could make arcade ports. Space Invaders, Missile Command, Asteroids. I mean, they had shown they could do it. So when I saw this thing, I was terribly disappointed. I never got it. I never bought it. And if somebody had it and I was at their house and we were playing, I'd play it, but I always thought it was terrible. And when Miss Pac-Man came out, it proved it. Atari just tried to go cheap. It's one of those things I've always just despised them over. So the legacy of Atari's Pac-Man is a double-edged sword. It represents the absolute peak of Atari's power and influence, but it also marks the beginning of the end. I think that's correct. I mean, I'd say that was one of the early nails in their coffin for sure. I mean, making all those copies. It's funny because whenever I would, you don't see games, old games at yard sales much these days. But back in the 90s and maybe the early 2000s, you'd go to a yard sale and you'd find an Atari with, 10, 12 cartridges, loose carts in a cardboard box. And I swear to you, more than once, this happened multiple times, there would be 2 copies of Pac-Man in the box. And I'm like, man, how did they end up with 2 of those? Did that ever happen to y'all? Whenever buying old games? The terrible quality of such a huge release shattered people's trust. Millions of players felt ripped off, and the idea that Atari name meant quality was destroyed. That loss of faith, plus the market flooded with the garbage third-party games, was a huge reason for the great video game crash of 1983. Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 changed games forever by showing the incredible heights the industry could reach and how fast it could all come burning down. From the living room duels of combat to the industry-shaking launch of Pac-Man, the Atari 2600 wasn't just a console. It was a laboratory for wild ideas. These 5 games were its greatest experiments. They gave us home multiplayer, the killer app, worlds to explore, the platformer, and a hard lesson on the dangers of hype. The graphics were basic, the sounds were bleeps and boops, but the ideas were monumental. Every time you team up with a friend online, explore a massive world, or get hyped for the next blockbuster game, you're feeling the echoes of these old school titles. The DNA of modern gaming was written right here on these chunky plastic cartridges, one brilliant idea at a time. Okay, I realize a list like this is very subjective. What would you put in there? What did I miss? Let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Now, if you're curious, if you've never seen the game Pitfall completed before, perfect score, all treasures collected, I do it right here. Check it out. Like, subscribe, share. Thank y'all. Later.